When I say the word truth, how do you interpret it? How do you see truth?
Having studied computer science and being extremely logical, I have a great tendency to evaluate truth according to logic statements. So I'm not sure if you'd call that absolute truth. So when statements are presented in a fashion that works very well for this easy to tell true or false, that's great. Life doesn't work like that. We have a lot of gray areas, and the ISTP, certainly, I don't know about the other types, you learn to deal with the gray area. There may be a tendency to be pedantic about the letter of the word stated and correct people, but you'd be spending all your time doing that if you were going to want people to speak absolute truth all the time. So yeah, I like the absolute truth, but you learn to deal with the fuzzy logic.
I think there's a couple different kinds. There is like a subjective truth, which is like your opinion, and somebody can't change that for you, like what your favorite color is, what your favorite movie is, who you fell in love with. That's your opinion, and other people really can't tell you that you're wrong to have that opinion. I think there's an objective truth, like stop signs are red, that's a dog, this is the color, even though you're colorblind, that still makes you wrong. This is the in general agreed upon color of, that's out there. And then I think there, absolute truth is, or relative truth is usually more of a difference of religious philosophy, in my opinion. Usually people who believe in absolute truths have a religious background. People that believe in, sometimes the other word for it is moral relativism, but I'm not sure that's the greatest word choice for that. I tend to know people who are more of an absolute truth variety than other philosophers. So, and an absolute values philosopher would say that their religious system dictates what is actually truth. And I don't really think that's the question you're asking today, but because we're not here to have a religious debate per se. We're here to learn how to communicate better with people. And so that's a totally different issue, because I've had a number of times where I've thought I was talking on the same wavelength, saying something was true, and other people are like, oh, that's not true. And I think that's where probably our conversation today is going to go is, well, if I make this statement and I say it's true and you look at me and go, oh, that's false, why do you say it's false versus why I think it's true? And usually that sticks more in the realm of objective truth. I might make a statement that's too much of a generalization, which would be very easy for a TE Dom to say, generally speaking, but I don't forget to put generally speaking in front of that. And I say something's true, and somebody looks at me and goes, but there are exceptions. And I'm like, oh yeah, there are exceptions. Okay, so back up, rewind. So,
in terms of what Deon said about identifying things that he considers to be true, or he uses some kind of a logical framework or an analysis, I probably would utilize a similar method, but it's subconscious. I wouldn't say I'm consciously doing it. So if someone were to make a statement about what they were to consider a fact or something like that, I would typically focus on whether the statement itself was contradictory, or whether it had some sort of a problematic component to it. So in terms of whether something is true or false, if the statement itself is directly self-refuting or contradictory, then it as a matter of pure logic, it can't be true. So if somebody was to say something like, this particular object in my hand is both red and green all over, that's clearly false. It can't be both of those things all over at the same time. So statements like that we can certainly say are false. In terms of what we can say is actually, what things can we say are actually true? I think that's a more difficult, to me anyway, that's a more difficult matter to try and get to the bottom of. In terms of categorizing truth the way Amy did, so I don't tend to categorize things that I consider true or false. So to me, if something is true, then it's true in virtue of the fact that it has particular properties, and it has the property of being true. So what I mean by that is, there is some sort of a proposition that reflects the way reality actually is. So if somebody makes a claim or a statement and it can be verified as true, then it simply has the property of being true. So whether that particular statement refers to what happens to be my favorite color, which was one of the examples that Amy used. So let's say my favorite color is blue. So that has the property of being true, but it has no more of a property of being true than a statement like the stop sign outside is red. So they're both true.
Yes.
So I wouldn't distinguish them in terms of the truth claim or the properties of it. Now, in terms of absolute truth, so I think that's something that's a little bit more difficult for me to define, because when I think potentially, what if Amy, if I'm correct in interpreting what I think you meant, are you talking about things like scientific theories or religious perspectives or?
Yes. Usually people who believe in absolute truth are usually coming from a religious background where like a god or philosophy is dictating something as being true, as opposed to as opposed to a scientific proposition where scientific principles, we've proven a lot of them and they are true, but there are still some that we generally accept as true, but we haven't truly proven them, and so therefore we tend to argue about them still.
So in terms of absolute truth, then I kind of I would. This is kind of a superficial way to divide this up, but I'm just going to try and make it as tangible as possible. So I think of truth in an absolute sense, on one hand in kind of a metaphysical way. So if you're positing God, or you're positing some underlying scientific laws of nature, or quantum particles or something like that. When I use the word metaphysical, what I mean is that there either is or there isn't entities that those names refer to. So there is either there is a God that that our beliefs can correspond with, or there is or there isn't subatomic particles that our theories actually explain or not. And so that's the metaphysical sense. So that's the sense of, in principle, those things could exist. And then on the other hand, there's the what I consider a more of an epistemological way to consider it, and that would be how can we learn about those truths? Like how can we actually say we can verify them? What methods can we use to say that actually we can say that God exists, or we can say that there are subatomic particles? And that's actually the more difficult part, because if
I would agree with you.
what I think about is, if what we think we know about the universe and the laws of nature is really true, we have no one but ourselves, or at least we can't get outside of ourselves to verify the truth of those claims, if that makes sense. So whether or not they're actually true, it isn't clear to me that we can actually verify their truth. So we don't have some kind of all-knowing spectator who can say Schrodinger's wave equation to describe, the wave function of interacting electrons. You've hit the nail on the head. You're on the right track, guys. Keep going. I'm not sure that we're ever going to find that out, or there isn't somebody going to just pop up one day and say, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. I don't see how we're going to verify any of the things objectively that we posit as true. So that they would be some loose ways that I would think about it.
That's fantastic, James. When you talk about medicine and you being a doctor, you mentioned how you like medicine not for like the actual medicine, but you like the abstract theory behind the medicine or something like that.
Yeah, so I kind of, the way I view my job, I suppose, is the most interesting part of it for me are the questions I can ask about the job rather than the practice of medicine. So in medicine, we assume that there's tons of objectivity. So we have, a catalog of diseases, we have tests that we use to diagnose them, and we have drugs that we prescribe every day to try and help people with their illnesses. And it's generally assumed among doctors and scientists and the people who take these medications or who attend their doctors that all of this is objective, and that if you have this particular disease state, that this represents some sort of objective entity that we've now coined as trying to think of a name, depression or anxiety, and we put all of these things into catalogs. You know, we have criteria in the way in which we describe them. So it's generally assumed that whatever science has to say about medicine or physics or chemistry or biology is just objectively true. And we're describing real entities in the world, we're describing real facts in the world, and there's nothing more to say about it other than that. So in terms of medicine, I mean, what I find interesting is that if you just look historically, in terms of the developments in medicine, the names of diagnoses have completely changed. Some have been thrown out, some have been conjured up on the basis of brand new evidence. And it's hard to say that a particular illness or a particular category of diseases is objective or binding if they're constantly changing. And we're finding new ones, and we're finding that old ones didn't exist. And the same doesn't just apply to medicine, the same actually applies across the board in terms of scientific discoveries and things like that. So it's in terms of truth, it's kind of hard to know exactly what truth means when whatever is
The
considered
baseline keeps
true
changing.
seems to change and take on a new form. It's kind of hard to know exactly what it is, I suppose.
It is true, yeah. The things that some people sometimes accept as objective truth is actually changing too, like what you were mentioning, definitions over time change. And yeah, really great points. And so, Kat.
I've been thinking a lot this week about a lot of truths are really, and Amy, I think you kind of touched on this, is like a lot of things that we accept as true are just, I mean, this is the sociologist in me too. I studied sociology for a long time, but the things that we take as true are just things that we've collectively agreed to be true, whether they're actually quantifiable or measurable or whatever else. And I think that's actually true of so many things that we take as truths in life. It's just like, well, we all just agreed. There's so many social constructs. I mean, even money, like money actually has no value. It's just we all decided it's got value. So it does. And I think about that in terms of language. Amy, you were mentioning colors or something earlier, and I was thinking about how, like, you know, green is green to us, but in another culture, it may be another color. I think like the Inuits have like a different color, a different word for like white or something. Like they've got a different way of
Bunch of different words for like ice and snow and versions of white. Yeah, they've got like 40 or something like that.
Yeah. So I think about language a lot too, and what meaning that gives to the things that we apply them to, and the way we just sort of take those things for granted. And then I was thinking also about kind of just while everyone was talking about TE, and I think a lot of times I have an interest in just like the utility of the truth. So it, you know, what is the, I think there are often cases where that's maybe my prime consideration when I'm evaluating a thing, if that makes sense.